My friend Jules Feiffer died last week, and I thought I'd take a few moments to share some thoughts about him. And to properly tell this story, I decided I would do it in video rather than written word. And to properly tell this story, I need to go all the way back in time to when I was just a kid. My father was a therapist as well as a professor of psychology at New Jersey State College, what is now Keene University. And sometimes, in order to pass time, I'd lie around in his office and I would peruse through the various textbooks that publishers would send him. Because when you're a kid, the contents inside these textbooks were pretty wild and, let's face it, probably inappropriate for my age. Regardless, I found it fascinating. And one textbook one day really grabbed me because the editors chose to use these really interesting cartoons to help illustrate the topics in each chapters. I loved comics, but I was used to things like Peanuts and Charlie Brown and Broomhilda and Family Circus and all that stuff. And this was really wild. This was really different kind of things. This was sort of like just ahead. There was very little action and dialogue. And usually it's just one character, but it was a different character from page to page. And I thought, this is pretty interesting stuff. And I kind of liked it. So I asked my dad about this. He said, oh, yeah. These are cartoons by a guy named Jules Feiffer. He's a regular in a newspaper called Village Voice. I pick it up sometimes. It's pretty great stuff. You might like it. And I said, oh, that's interesting. So I read all the cartoons that were in there. A little while later, my father and I were walking through Penn Station, and there was a little bookstore down there, and in the window was this book that just grabbed my attention instantly. I could not let go. It was called The Great Comic Book Heroes. And without even looking inside it, I knew I had to have it because in addition to loving comic strips, I loved comic books. And this was just something amazing. I begged my father for a copy of this book, and he said, well, look, not now. We don't have time. But I tell you what, your birthday and Christmas are coming up. I'm sure we'll find a way to get that in your hands. And this is what he did, because I have that original book. And he must have asked my Aunt Jen, or my Aunt Jen asked him, what should I get for little Nicky? And here it is, her inscription inside. It says, Christmas 1973, Dear Nicky, may you always find the comedy in life, love, Aunt Jen. Fun fact, my Aunt Jen's second husband was Uncle Murray, and he is the namesake for the character in my books. It's a seminal work in comic book history. It was the first book to not only look at comic books as not just an art form, and even that wasn't happening so much then, but as a integral part of American history and culture. And I gobbled it up. I couldn't believe it. And as I was reading it, I was looking at the author's name. I go, wait a minute, his name, Jules Feiffer. That's kind of familiar to me. And I asked my dad, and he said, yeah, it's the same guy who wrote that book, made all those comics you liked. That's inside that textbook in my office. I go, huh, that's pretty impressive. A little while later, as I said, my father was also a therapist, and one of his clients was this woman named Nancy. And what was great about my dad's clientele was he had a lot of young actors. And Nancy was starring in this off-Broadway production of a play called Knock Knock, and she gave my father a couple tickets. We got to see great stuff that way. And it's an amazing play, cracked me up. It's about Joan of Arc has returned, and for whatever reason, she's decided to return inside the apartment of these two grumbly old men. There are really only 4 actors for this entire production. There was Nancy's Joan of Arc, these 2 other actors, and another character actor who would play all of Joan's voices, as well as little cameos coming in and out as various figures. And that actor was Judd Hirsch. So I loved it. blew my mind. It actually gave me some very real thoughts about maybe writing plays, because what I saw on stage, that was amazing. So my father and I are talking about it afterwards on our way home, and he says to me, the guy who wrote that play, his name is Jules Feiffer. He's the same guy who wrote that book on comics that you love and makes all those comics in the Village Voice that you were digging. And I go, what are you talking about? So this one guy did all these different things, wrote about comics, made comics, wrote plays. He says, oh yeah, he does a lot of stuff. He writes novels. He's written screenplays. I mean, that's amazing. So years later, I found myself working as a bookseller. And one of my jobs was I ran a lot of signing events at a children's bookstore called Books of Wonder in Manhattan. It's still there. And through that job, I got to meet Jules Feiffer, because Jules Feiffer was making these phenomenal picture books at the time, starting with Bark George and moving on to Meanwhile and I Lost My Bear. So he would come into the store for signing events each and every single time. And the very first time he came in, I did what I always did, was I asked the author, can I get you anything? Can I get you a cup of water, tea, coffee, anything like that? Jules, being Jules, looks up at me and says, I'll have a ham sandwich, ham and cheese on toasted rye with tomato, mustard, no mayonnaise. Of course. I picked it up. I went outside and went to the deli a few doors over, got exactly what he wanted, and he's signing books for customers while he's munching on his sandwich and sipping his coffee, and it was great. And we had this wonderful conversation at the time because we both loved old comic strips. Around the third or fourth time he came into the store, I brought with me something special that I picked up. It was a copy of this amazing book, Tantrum. If you don't know it, do yourself a favor and try to find it. It's easy enough to find in hardcover. It was reissued in paperback not that long ago. You can find it on eBay. It's about a man who gets so fed up with all the responsibilities in life that he decides to literally regress overnight and become a baby. So now maybe people will take care of him for a change. It's brilliant. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to get this for my dad because Father's Day is coming up, and I think he would really appreciate it considering this history that Jules, my father, and I sort of indirectly share. So he did. So here it is, written inside, very simply, to Bob Brule, Jules Feiffer. The only problem is that I never got the opportunity to give this book to my father because my father died suddenly on June 12th, 2002. And I was pretty broken up about it. For the next 10 days, my responsibility was to attend to my mother's needs. And my mother was not easy. That's the subject of another video, perhaps. The one thing that got me out and about again, that I had a responsibility to attend to, was the very first Mocha Comic Art Festival was taking place down at the Puck Building sometime in mid-June. And I had to be a part of that. I had been volunteering for months in sort of advisory and just taking care of small items of interest. And I promised to volunteer that day to help with the setup and bringing the creators to their tables and such. And I took that seriously. But more importantly, the very first featured creator for the very first Mocha Arts Festival was Jules Feiffer. And I kind of wanted to see him again. We didn't know each other that well at that point, but we knew each other well enough that we'd recognize each other. And so I show up that day. I don't tell anybody what's happened to me. And I'm standing by the doorway and I'm looking at the itinerary and I see that he has to give a talk midway through the day. And I go up to somebody who's in charge of the whole festival. And I say to that person, I kind of know Jules Feiffer, and I know him well enough that when you sit him down to give his talk, make sure he's got something to eat. Jules Feiffer likes to eat. And I got the impression that they didn't take me real seriously. But that's okay. Because shortly after that, Jules Feiffer came into the building and he's making his way through the crowd and through all the well-wishers. And he sees me. He goes, "Nick, what are you doing here?" I go, "I'm volunteering today. I'm going to help out wherever I can." "Oh, excellent. Let's catch up later." And he makes his way through. The people I was talking to, they kind of like look at me and say, "Oh my God, he wasn't lying. Okay, maybe you should take him seriously." So when Jules sat down that day to give his talk and answer questions, they had for him a slice of pizza, they had for him a big waffle, they had for him 3 different drinks to choose from, and a bowl of peanuts and bag of chips, everything. It was great. A little while after that, I decided I'm going to write Jules a letter. I had his address. He didn't live all that far from me. And I thought, I'm just going to write him a letter and tell him how much it meant to me to see him that day, to talk to him, however briefly, and to be able to help him out like I did, and to tell him why. And I wrote him that letter, and I brought it straight to his doorman because he was only a few blocks away from me. And I got a call later on that day. And I was like, I was a little surprised. I said, "Jules, I'm surprised to be hearing you." He said, "How could I not call you after reading a letter like that?" And that's kind of where the friendship began. I would see him fairly regularly over the years later on. And he did me a couple of really huge favors. So the very first book I ever did, and I don't know if this has ever been revealed on my Facebook page, as it were, was this sort of semi-self-published thing by a comic book company called Syncopated. Only did a few books, and it's called How to Be a Real Good Cartoonist. And Jules gave me a advanced word of praise: funny, smart, and slightly caustic. It's a strange book on how to be a cartoonist if you really have no idea of how to be a cartoonist. But later on, when I would be able to shake off the siren song of becoming a professional cartoonist myself, I'd start doing children's books. And the one that really launched me was, of course, this one, Bad Kitty. And I was talking to Jules quite a bit while I was putting this book together, and he was one of the first people to see the dummy version of it before it was published. And so he offered for me what is the best imaginable advanced word of praise. And so on the back cover of the very first edition of this book says, "A for amazing, B for buoyant, C for charming. Bad Kitty takes us on a mad and manic joyride through the alphabet. And if once is not enough, just watch out. D for delightful." Signed, Jules Feiffer. Last time I saw Jules was about 6 months ago during the spring. And he was as sharp as a tack at 95. Yeah, we should all be as witty and insightful at 25 as he was at 95. And he had just completed this massive project that he called his graphic memoirs, where every sheet of paper was 18 by 24 inches, and he was hand painting and handwriting his entire autobiography on these hundreds of sheets of paper. He was doing 2 to 3 a day, he was telling me, and they're phenomenal. I would love more than anything else to see those pages in print for the world to see somehow. And I don't know how that's going to happen, but I only hope it does. And if there's anyone who's watching this or watched it this far who knows about this or is a part of making this project real, please reach out to me. I want to see what I can do to contribute. I'm going to close by saying that someone once said, don't meet your heroes. Whoever said that was a knucklehead, because I had the good fortune to meet mine, and it was glorious. So if that opportunity ever presents itself to you, grab it if you can, because I did. And I will miss Jules every day for the rest of my life. Thank you for watching this far.